Everybody help yourself to the cookies and apples. We have healthy food and not so healthy food. We're going to go ahead and get started here in about a minute. I'm going to call this work session of the Henry County Council and Commissioners to order. Commissioner President's not here, but we're good to go. I'm going to start with Pledge of Allegiance, and we'll have a short prayer. The main purpose of the meeting is Jason Simler, and he's not here yet, and I don't have a text from him, so we'll do a few housekeeping things. You know, my wife, I just talked to her before coming in, and she's stuck in rush hour traffic in Indy, so hopefully Jason's not in the same boat. Council, I gave you some notes, some upcoming dates. I don't need to necessarily read those aloud. I did correspond with our counselor, Joel Harvey, asking about the public hearing regarding to a possible adoption of a PSAP. He said that needed to have he reiterated what he did at our last meeting in May, a 10-day notice in both papers, and that means we will miss the publication tomorrow of the Middletown News. So as soon as we could have a hearing with that 10-day requirement, legal requirement to advertise, would be at our work session on the 29th. So please mark that. 29th will need to be a special meeting, even though that was previously intended to be a work session, so we can follow the legal requirements of that. Okay, our regular meeting's on Thursday the 22nd. Time would be 4:30, so that Mike can make it and not get in trouble with your boss. I have a few other notes about a State Board of Account called meeting for council members, county council members on the 29th. Wagner and Sheila, we should have their annual market analysis of employee salaries the week of the 26th, so we actually should have that in hand at our special meeting on the 29th. And then a reminder that our annual budget hearings are the last two Wednesday and Friday, the last Wednesday and Friday in July, and the first Wednesday and Friday in August. If you're interested in going to the ICCA called meeting in Carmel, see Debbie, and she can register that for you. And since it's a called meeting, the registration should be paid for. When Jason gets here, and I'm... Hey, you snuck in. I should look up more often. I'm not that unobservant. Just a reminder, this is our annual report that we've had at least 5 years. I think it started with Umball and then Baker Tilly now. Jason and/or Paige is usually the one who has given this presentation. It's very thorough. It's a 5-year. Last June we received that. Usually we get a final. This is a draft. Usually we get a final after some information comes from Debbie and the state during our budget hearings or at the beginning of our budget hearings that helps us out with more specific data. But it's been very beneficial, the report that he has, or Paige has provided us in the past. And I know Baker Tilly's also the financial advisors for Newcastle as well. So well respected, and they use prescribed professional standards to develop this with a lot of input from department heads. So unless there's any questions for the council, and since Jason's been here for a half hour, the floor is yours, Jason.
better? Okay, that's good. I want to start with really page 4, just kind of get some historical information, as well as kind of where we've come in the last couple years, and then how this can maybe impact some of the assumptions that we're using in the future. So if you turn to page 4, I wanted to hit a couple of highlights. At the top of the page, I actually start with the bottom of the page, that bar graph. That shows your historical assessed value for the county. So this is the tax base of the county, all the assessed value that pays property taxes that help fund the budget of the county, the schools, townships, libraries, and cities and towns. So we went back to 2019. So you can see in 2019 it was $1,524,000,000. You can see for the last 4 years it stayed pretty flat. It's actually decreased a little bit. So that's very important because, again, this is your tax base of what pays taxes to fund your budgets. And then you can see the tax rate right above it. In 2019, the tax rate was 77 cents. So that meant it took 77 cents per $100 of assessed value to fund the county's budget. 2020 increased to 80 cents, 2021, 82 cents, and 2022, 82 cents. So what you would like to see is your assessed value increases. If your assessed value increases faster than your budget increases, tax rates fall. If your budget increases faster than your tax base, tax rates increase, and that's what you see has happened here. It's not so much that your budget has increased substantially, it's just that your tax base has been pretty flat, or it's actually decreased, and that's what has caused the creeping of tax rates, and that's very common. But what I wanted to show you in 2023, you can see your tax base went from $1.5 billion to $1.7 billion. Pretty large increase. And as you probably saw that when you got your tax bills and your assessed values, it did increase a lot. And that was pretty typical throughout the state. But I wanted to show you the tax rate. Correspondingly, the tax rate decreased. So it did exactly what we thought it would do. Now that's important from the county's perspective because those who've been on the council for a while and you've gone through the budget process, you know the state dictates how much money that you can raise from property taxes. And it's called your maximum levy. Every unit of government has a maximum levy. Every county in the state, every city, every town, school, township, library. Again, that dictates how much revenue you can pay from property taxes. You can't raise a penny more. So it doesn't matter if Corey has a company come in, has 100 jobs, 200 jobs, $100 million of new investment. It's not in a TIF area. It gets all added to the tax base. You can't raise another penny in property taxes because you're at your maximum levy. But what it does do is it reduces your tax rate. Just like what we saw in 2023, the assessed value went down, your tax rate went down. But how that does help the county is that when your tax rates go down, those property tax owners, they're at the circuit breaker caps, 1% for homeowners, 2% for rental property or agricultural, 3% for commercial, they're not either hitting the cap or they're not hitting as much. So you're not losing as much. So again, the circuit breaker caps, great for the taxpayer because it's a reduction in the amount of property taxes they have to pay, but bad for the local units of government because it's less money that you receive. So that's where you see on the top of the page, the blue is the amount of revenue that you brought in for property taxes over the last 5 years, and the red is what you've lost. So again, in 2019, brought in about $10.3 million. 2020 brought in 10.6. 2021, 10.3. 2022, 10.2. 2003, 11.3 million. Again, you can see how your circuit breaker over time has actually creeped as well. But again, in 2023, you can see the circuit breaker cap was just over $2 million, when the prior year was over $2.1 million. So again, because of the reduction in your property tax rates, that decreased your circuit breaker losses. So it really gave you more money in your general fund and your other funds that you use to help fund your budget. I just really wanted to point that out because that's really crucial as some of our assumptions that we're talking about going forward and as you start looking at your budget for 2024. I know I hit a lot of information, but did anyone have any questions or regarding that?
I know last year when you gave the report, we were down 3% from 5 years prior as far as our assessed value. So it's good to see it finally creep up. It'll be interesting to see what happens for 2024.
Yeah, and that's something that as we start talking about our assumptions, I do want to talk about, because the legislation that just finished about a month ago did play a role in what those new assessments could look like. So turning on page 6, I do want to hit on some of those assumptions, because it does impact this report, and it will impact some of the decisions that you'll be making for 2024 and going forward. Again, starting on page 6, number 1, kind of footnote receipts. Talking about your maximum levy, it does increase, or I should say it does change each year. It typically increases. And it's based upon the 6-year average of non-farm income. So historically, in the last few years, that incomes have been rising, and so your maximum levy has been growing. Before last couple of years, the average is about a 3% increase in your maximum levy, which has been a problem for local governments because, again, your maximum levy, the amount you can raise in property taxes, has grown by 3%. But as you can imagine, your budgets have been growing more than 3% just because of inflation. But with the increase in wages, for 2023, you can see your maximum levy grew by 5%. So that was a pretty healthy increase compared to historical averages. Again, that's great for your budget because that means you can raise more from property taxes and provide more services for the county. But as I mentioned, most of us saw increases in our assessed values, saw increases in our property taxes. That was statewide. The legislation heard that, so they reacted, and so they did some things to soften the impact on residential homeowners. And one of the things they did was that formula that I talked about is the 6-year average of non-farm income. Now they've capped it at 4% for 2024 and 2025. So what you probably could have increased your maximum levy, your budget next year would have been closer to 6%. The legislators capped it at 4% for 2024 and 2025. So we incorporated that here. And right now it's just a 2-year adjustment. And starting in 2026, it's supposed to go back to the normal formula, and we're projecting that's going to be close to 5%, 4.9%. So if you looked at our report last year, we were probably assuming closer to like 5% increase in your maximum levy for 24 and 25, but we've made that adjustment. Footnote number 2, the net assessed value. We are showing an increase in 2024. I know Jody, county assessor, she's working on assessments right now for probably 2024, so you'll probably have those here in the next maybe 2 months. Something else that the legislation did that's going to impact that assessed value or tax base, 2 things. One, again, to try to soften the impact on property tax, residential taxpayers' property taxes, is they increase the supplemental deductions that we receive. As homeowners, if you've looked at your property taxes, you have your gross assessed value of your house, then it's less a homestead deduction, and it's less the supplemental deduction, about 35%. So for like a house that assesses for $100,000, you're only paying taxes on about $32,000 after all those deductions. Well, they've increased those deductions, again, for 2024 and 2025. So now that $100,000 house who was paying taxes on $32,000, now they're paying taxes on more like $24,000, $20,000 of assessed value. So again, what that does is it reduces what tax base you had. Again, that's probably going to increase tax rates a little bit and maybe increase your circuit breaker losses. The other thing that you did, which I know you guys are aware of, they expanded the definition of a homestead. Before it was like an acre land, maybe a garage, but they've increased that. So now larger pieces of land can qualify for that 1% credit. So those 2 combination of things will probably increase your circuit breaker losses for 2024. So we've incorporated that here. The next footnote there is 3. As I said, you have your maximum levy, and you do have some flexibility with that maximum levy. You get to determine how that maximum levy, the amount of property taxes you collect, are allocated between various funds. So you have your general fund, reassessment, Cume Bridge, health, and park fund. So you can see from 2020 to 2023 how you've allocated that. So you've roughly allocated about 85% of your property taxes to your general fund, which is typical because that's the fund that has most of your activity, most of your operating expenses. and then around 2 to 3% in your other funds. And you can see in 2024, I've kind of tweaked them a little bit, how much you've allocated, and this is just kind of an illustration. This is something that as a council, you'll make that decision this summer as you're working on your budget and looking at your budgeted expenses and anticipated revenues. But we've tried to match the revenues with the expenses that we're showing here. But from page 6, this is just kind of the assumptions that we used for this report. Turn to page 7. One of the other key assumptions that we used on top of page 7, footnote number 4, is the amount of your property taxes that you lose for circuit breaker. In 2020, we're not showing here, you lost about 20% of your property taxes from circuit breaker. So you're only receiving about 80% of the taxes to fund your services that you're really entitled to. The other 20% was going to property tax relief to taxpayers. But because of the increase in the tax base and the reduction in tax rates, you're only losing a little over 17% this year. But as you can see, I've projected about 1% increase per year going forward because, again, I think your budgets are going to increase faster than your assessed value, than your tax base. So I think your circuit breaker is going to start creeping up again unless we see another windfall of increase in assessed value. The next, you can kind of read through there. I won't hit, they're just kind of basically using the historical averages for expenses and revenues. Page 8, I did assume, except for capital projects, I did assume a 3% increase in operating expenses going forward. So I took your 2023 budget, and for 24, 25, and 26, I assumed a 3% annual increase. Then with that, I'll probably start hitting the, unless there's any questions, I'll start hitting the specific funds. And I'll start on page 10 with your general fund. And please, if you have any questions or if I'm going too fast, let me know, and I'd be happy to slow down or answer any questions. So again, page 10 is your general fund. This is your most active, largest fund. Again, we've shown the last 3 years of historical information. So you can see in 2020, if you look at the bottom of the page, line 38, the ending balance in your general fund was $2.2 million. You can see in 2021, it was $2.8 million. In 2022, it was $3.1 million. So that's a good trend, going in the right direction. You're increasing your cash flows, increasing your balances. If you look at line 40, you can see the operating balance per percentage. You know, those who've been here a couple years, you know what that is. You know, in 2020, it was 15%. 2022 was 20%. What that means is if you look at your ending cash balance on line 38, for 2022, you had $3,147,000 outstanding. If you look at your expenses for that year, $15,245,000, that means you have enough money in the bank at the end of the year to cover 20% of your expenses. At the minimum, we suggest 15%, which is about 2 months. And I can tell you when we first did that, 15% was a lofty goal for us to achieve. You guys have achieved that, so I have to commend you for that. But I have to say that's our minimum goal. My ideal goal for counties is 50%. If you could have 50%, that means you have enough money in the bank to cover 6 months of expenses. So if something were to happen and settlement was late for whatever reason, and you didn't get your settlement in June or July, when balances are typically low, you have enough money in the bank to cover, again, 6 months of expenses.
If we gave no raises for the next 10 years, we probably could achieve 50%, unless the state did something miraculous that they've not done in the last 20 years.
Well, and we're showing here, if you look at this trend, even with the assumptions that we made, you're increasing your cash balances as we're showing. We're not at the 50% level, but we're showing by 2026, your ending balance is lower $4 million at 25%.
Well, I know the first year you and Paige presented, I think it was 19 that Susan and I and Harold were here. We had like vapors, zero in the cash balance.
I think it was $370 or something like that.
Zero of a $15 million general fund.
So that's why you guys have come a long way from when we first did this report.
Yeah. Well, no, there's departments eyeing that 25% you just alluded to, saying we could use that. And I know they all could use a salary increase.
So again, if you look at 2022, ending the year with $3.1 million, if you look at 2022, we're assuming 100% collections. We're kind of looking at historical revenues to come up with your miscellaneous revenues. But if you look at line 21, if this comes to fruition, we're looking at you to bring in about $16,192,000. If you spend your entire budget and don't have any additional appropriations throughout the year, you'll spend about $15.4 million. So you'll bring in about $745,000 more than what you're spending, which that's the kind of the budget you want to approve, is a balanced budget where you're spending just what you're bringing in, or a budget where you're spending a little bit less than what you're bringing in to increase your cash balances, which is what it appears you're going to be doing in 2023, again, if these assumptions hold true. But then as you can see in 2014, again, we're looking at, if you look at line 35, again, we're projecting to bring in more than what you're spending, but only about $300,000. And then 2025, only about $74,000. And then again, if these assumptions hold true, in 2026, we're looking at you might be spending a little bit more than what you're bringing in. Again, this is assuming a 3% increase in your operating expenses going forward. The other thing I didn't hit on the assumptions page, but part of your general fund is payable from income taxes. And of course, there's some other funds that are strictly income taxes. I've kept that flat at your 2023 amount to try to be conservative. So this does assume that your income tax revenues do not change from what you're collecting in 2023. So any questions on your general fund?
Okay, so we're going to bring in this year $745,000 more than we spent. And that's because of the increase in our tax receipts over what we expected when we budgeted last year.
That, and a large part of that really is, if you look on line 16, and you've gotten a supplemental deduction, basically an extra income tax distribution you have for the last couple of years. You've got an extra $534,000 this year. So of that $575,000, the majority of that is that additional revenue that you didn't know you were going to receive when you were doing your budget last year.
Does the state give that to us because of their huge multi-billion-dollar surplus, or they kind of divvy some back?
No, that is your money. That's money that the taxpayers that live in Henry County have paid. The state holds kind of a balance and reserves at the State House before they distribute to the individual counties, and they hold up to 15%. So there's more money at the state level that's really Henry County's money, but they just hold that for fluctuations in the economy. But when it gets above 15%, then they submit an extra distribution to the counties.
So when you give us estimates to budget with each year, do you calculate that 15% they're holding? Or, okay, so we just used more conservative estimates. I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just trying to understand. We used conservative estimates, and then there was excess over what we used to budget.
Yeah. So I just for going forward, we just kept your income tax revenues flat going forward. But if the income taxes continue to increase over time, that could be additional revenue for you as well.
Okay.
But then typically the state also increases your distribution, as you've seen over the years, but they may not. Let's say your revenue increased by $110,000. They may give you $100,000 and keep that extra 10. And then they recalculate and say, okay, we're over the 15%. We need to give you $10,000 more, and that's what you got the extra supplemental deduction.
The supplemental's been a real plus, helping us a lot because it's increased by over $150,000 each of the last 4 years. So it's one of those like Christmas gifts we get in June.
It's helped us because when we submit a balanced budget, then that's monies that we can still save and increase our operating balance with. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not something that I would want to count on in the future, but
Right.
it's nice to receive.
Yeah. Thank you.
Going on, if you turn to page 12, looking at your public safety income tax. So this is another income tax that the county collects that can only be applied towards public safety type expenses. You can see there that about a balance of about $200,000 per year. If you look at line 2, last year you collected $1,280,000. This year you're certified to receive $1,350,000. So your revenues are anticipated to increase about $100,000 this year. You can look at your budget there, about $1.1 million. So again, bringing in more than what you receive, about $381,000. So because of that, we are projecting an increase in your cash flows here.
Jason, last year I had a note when you presented last June. I wrote down, your comment says the 51%. Now this year it's 54%. Will help us in our shortage or our trending downward in 911.
Right. Yeah, so as we talked about the operating balances, so if you look at, say, the end of 2023, we're projecting an ending balance of about $600,000. Your budget for the year is, a little over $1.1 million. So again, you have over 50% here. So since you do have a pretty healthy balance here, if you do see shortfalls like in your 911, you can move some of those expenses from there and pay it out of public safety, because that'd be an eligible expense.
Which we need to probably prioritize as something at budget time to do. Even though that won't be enough with the projections you gave Butch, it's
Right.
something we need to consider in the whole scheme of throwing them a life preserve.
So that's where I think this report, I think the county has used this, and I know Paige, when she helps you with your budget, this is where you can start kind of matching your expenses with the funds that have revenues coming in that can support them.
This might be a question for Debbie, I don't know. I'm looking at the other services and charges and operating disbursements on line item 12 on this page. We show from disbursements of $896,000 in 2021, $755,000 in 2022, and only $338,000 in 2023. And then you're using that 338 with a 3% escalator for the next few years. I mean, that's over $500,000 that we've not spent on something. I guess, do you know what that would be, Debbie or council or? Okay, so those are just expenses that are now coming from a different place. Thank you.
Took 150 from repair and maintenance from the safety lit and moved it to the jail lit. So there's 150,000 right there, Shannon.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's actually the next fund, so good to segue. Page 14. So this is the correctional facility jail lit rate. So the county put this in place really for two things. One, to fund the new jail facility that was built a couple years ago. But also this revenue can be used to help fund some operating expenses as well. That's above and beyond the debt service. So as you can see there, the jail lit, it's about has been about $1.8, $1.9 million, but it continued to grow. And this year, you're going to receive $2,112,000. You can see on line 10, your bond payments for the jail are about $1,725,000. And then you can see, I think it was mentioned, $186,000 that got moved to this fund, and we've assumed that going forward. So again, this is one fund that it continues to grow, so it can be continued to use to help fund some operating costs. Or I know there's also been discussions about additional improvements out in the jail. This can be used for that as well.
Part of the legislation that was passed was they upped the 20% that could be used for operating, but it looks like our actual rental payments we don't have 20% to tap, even though that's allowed now to tap over that. The difference between 2.1 million and 1.7 is not 20%, so it doesn't help us a whole lot.
Yeah, I'm not for sure where that legislation came from, but they did two things. Those counties that have bonds outstanding, before the rate was capped at 0.2%, they increased it to 0.3% for counties that have issued bonds. So I don't know if there's a county out there that issued bonds and then found out later that the 0.2 wasn't enough to cover it, so they changed the legislation for them, but that's a benefit to you guys if you wanted to change that. But if you don't do that and stay at the 0.2, you can use that all for operating, which before you were capped at 0.2%. But you're right, at this time, you don't have that much gap between your debt service and the amount you receive to worry about that right now.
So right now, we have about 200,000 extra each year we could use for expenses. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There doesn't have to be, I mean, we have to do the 1.723 million annually. That has to come from the jail lid or no?
Right, but you don't have to set any more above and beyond that. Yeah.
Okay.
I have to look back at, we may already have a debt service reserve set aside from bond proceeds in an account, but that's already been taken care of, so you don't have to set aside any of this money. What's in here is available for use.
I know that our jail, one of the commissioners shared that our jail, I think Whitley County's looking at a jail modeled after ours, either Elevados or Wygant. And our $25 million jail was projected to be closer to $32 million.
I had that same conversation with them today out on the golf course, and you're exactly right. And so we certainly built at the right time with inflation and construction costs.
So 0.2% wouldn't have built our jail.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling construction cost and inflation, that's why the legislation up that.
Go to the next fund that we looked at, the reassessment fund. Again, this fund, it's doing well, it's doing healthy. This is one fund where they typically don't spend 100% of what they budgeted. I think they usually spend around 90%. So we've assumed that this department spends 100%. And even if they did do that, you can see that they have enough revenue coming in to cover those expenses and still have some money left over at the end of the year. We are showing that those balances are decreasing a little bit each year. But again, that's only if they spend 100% of their budget, which historically they haven't done. The next fund is the Park Non-Reverting Fund. So nothing really to point out here, except you can see that the ending balances is decreasing a little bit each year, but based upon the budget that was approved and increasing that per 3% per year, and the amount that you've allocated to the park fund, it's showing that you can fund that balance or that budget, for a number of years. 2027, it looks like we might have to tweak the amount that you allocate to the park fund at that time, but for the next couple of years, it looks like it'll be solid in the Park Non-Reverting Fund. Next page is the Health Fund. This is one where we did tweak because if you kept the same allocation, there wouldn't be enough revenue to cover the expenses. So if you look at line 2, this is one fund that we have kind of adjusted from time to time over the years. So like in 2020, again, if you look at line 2, you collected $437,000 in property taxes. We decreased it to $415,000, decreased it to $373,000. In 2020, it's $400,000. And then you can see in 2024, I've increased it to $485,000. And that's just so that we can show that your amount that you're bringing in is a little bit less than what you're spending for the budget, but still enough to keep a 15% operating balance.
I have a feeling that the recent legislation that we've opted into is going to make a huge difference in some of this, or this will go towards our match to meet that qualification that the state set forward.
So that might be something, as you learn more about that match, that we might need to tweak this a little bit more as you determine what that is.
Did I say that right, Angela? That a lot of this would go to the match to the opt-in that we just So we should be in decent shape, it appears, what you just shared.
The next fund's the local health fund, and the budget pretty much matches the revenues bringing in, about $37,000 of revenue coming in from grants and miscellaneous receipts, and then a budget similar to that. So we just kind of kept that flat going forward. 24, or page 24, here's the statewide 911 fund. So this is one fund that we are projecting that based upon current revenues and the current budget. It looks like at the end of the year, you're going to end with about $50,000 ending balance. But then in 2024, you can see there that, based upon, the 2023 budget and keeping the revenues flat, it does appear that there's not enough revenues to cover that budget in 2024 going forward. So as mentioned earlier, that's something that, the options are increase revenues through income taxes or move some of these expenses to other funds where you do have some more flexibility.
Council members, there were some questions broached by Council Member Hoon to Debbie, and she responded. If you've looked at your Henry County email, she responded about 1:15 this afternoon for some data that would correspond to what Jason's sharing. We're looking at a PSAP, and I mentioned, and I don't know when you came in because I wasn't looking up, but a public hearing on the 29th to go over that at 4:30. So FYI, we are looking seriously into that because we can't continue down this path with projected shortfall next year. I think you shared something with Butch back in January that projected 2026 being in the red, but this is showing next year starting to be in the red. So
I have a question for Jason. Jason, obviously, no one wants to raise the tax locally. I mean, it's the last thing I want to do. Also, 911 is really important, and so is public safety. Do you see any path for us where we don't have to raise a tax to keep 911 solvent?
Long term, it's going to be difficult because I think, on the short term, you could move some expenses to other funds, but then you're just eating away at the cash of those other funds. So it's
We've worked so hard to build up, yeah. So, I mean, it's generally inevitable.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you mentioned, raises earlier on. I mean, this is a conversation that I'm having with, counties through all the state. It's not a situation that you want to be in, but costs are rising. I don't have to tell you guys don't deal with this every year, but costs are rising faster than your maximum levy. And like I said, last year it was kind of a nice surprise when you saw a 5% increase your maximum levy because that was helped to offset some of your increased costs. Now that you're capped at 4%, my guess is your costs are going to be increasing more than 4%, even if you didn't give any raises or do other things that I'm sure you want to do. Your costs are probably going to increase more, and it just makes your situation even more difficult.
Have there been any counties that you've seen successfully avoid having to resort to the 911 tax?
I mean, I looked before I came here. I think there's 52 or 53 counties that have higher tax rates than you. And I'm working with, every year more and more counties increase their taxes, not just because of 911, but just the
Right.
overall budget. So I know 911 is part of that. You guys are already doing, what we recommend. You're doing your kind of rotating bond issues to help fund capital projects, so you don't have to fund them out of your general fund, so that frees up money for these other expenses. You're already doing that. We've shown you've increased your budgets, which that was my first goal before you start spending more money and make sure you have healthy balances so you're there. Still encourage you a bit higher, but I understand that you want to give raises and do other things and make your fund solvent. But really, counties, you have two choices: cut expenses or raise revenues. Those are really your only two choices. And where you can raise revenues, you only have a few places through bond issues, which, I sell bonds, but that's not the cheapest way of doing it. Raising your cum cap funds, which you've done that, and then raising income taxes. And as I mentioned before, but I'll say it again, the circuit breaker credits, when they came out in 2008, legislators knew that that was going to put a strain on local governments because it was going to reduce revenues. And I don't think they realized how much it was going to reduce revenues at the time, but they knew it was going to have an impact. And that's why they revised the local income tax structure, and it made it more flexible and increased the amount that you can raise in income taxes. I think, Ken, you said before, they've kind of passed the buck to the county to make that tough decision, but that was the reason they did it, was because they knew there were going to be some difficult times ahead, and they wanted to give you a tool
And
for
they
you
could
to
say,
use.
we kept your taxes at the state level. It's your locals that raised them. I wonder why that was.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but you're not alone in talking
Right.
about this.
I mean, I hate that I will likely have to vote for this. I hate that we have to raise taxes, but public safety is probably our number one priority. I just wish the state didn't keep everything at the state level and they would let us spend our money like we should instead of allowing us the option of raising a new tax. The fiscal hero stuff at the State House is irritating.
I think the head of the Indiana not the school board, it's too many years, County Council Association, I think about half the counties have adopted a PSAP, and probably a quarter of them are looking at having to seriously consider that. So we're in the same boat because the state's not keeping up with the cost, and our staffing's not adequate. According to Butch, we're below about every standard imaginable. We use part-time to fill in. So anyway, we're going to have to not kick this one down the road. It's going to have to be addressed. So
At a minimum, I would hope that we can structure this PSAP in a way that is effective and efficient and, not too much. I'm assuming you guys can help with that, so.
I have a-
And one thing with the PSAP, from the county's perspective, it is raising a tax, and I mean, this is good for the county, but that PSAP, 100% of the new revenue will come to you to be applied for the PSAP, because that, something benefits the entire county. Where if you were to, like say, adopt the public safety tax or edit tax, that gets allocated to the other units, cities and towns. So from the county's perspective, not from the city's perspective, which you also represent the city, but from the county's perspective, the PSAP is the most efficient way for you to get the most money for that particular purpose.
And for me, could you clarify, hypothetically, we pass the PSAP to keep 911 solvent in future years. How does that change the funding with regards to Newcastle versus Henry County of 911?
Like any current agreements?
Right, are we paying more of a percentage than we were before, or are we paying less, or just overall impact? Can you speak to that?
If there's any existing agreements, which I think there are maybe between the county, I don't know what impact, if that's even been decided, how that's going to change things or not. I just know that if you were to pass this, 100% of the revenue that you receive would go to the county.
I would just hope that, I'm just speaking for myself, but I would hope that, everybody pays their fair share.
I have a,
Right now, we pay $350,000 and you don't pay anything. There is no fair share. We're paying into it.
I'm just, I'm
I
just
don't-
making sure I understand the situation. I'm not pointing fingers or saying you are or aren't. I'm just wanting to understand the situation because I'm going to have to vote on it.
let's move on.
yeah, we don't need to argue about it right now. I have a question. Can you help me understand again the public safety lit graph? We seem to be increasing our cash balances quickly, and it seems to be continuing on. And could you explain again the driver behind that for me?
Which fund again?
Safety lit.
The public safety? Let me go back.
That's the one that, with the increased balance, you said that could also help with 911.
I've just, on page 13, we had been maintaining a balance of around 200,000. and then we're gonna jump up by 400,000, then another 200,000, and just, it's trending upward, and I
Right.
wanna see if it's reasonable that we could absorb 911 costs into that fund. Is it gonna continue to go up like that, or what's driving that?
Well, I think what's driving that is, I think a large part is what was, if you look at line 12, the other services and charges, it was kind of mentioned, it's historically been around $700,000 to $900,000, and that decreased in this year's budget to $340,000. I
So as we moved things to the jail lit, we freed up those, okay.
So there could be some more shuffling going on that could help short term. But as you can see, even through this, the balance is increasing a little bit each year, by $200,000, so that could help fund some of it.
Thank you.
We just have to budget with that in mind,
Right.
so it doesn't all go to some other department program fund.
And that's where I think this report would be helpful, again, not knowing what the council's, goals or desires, but if you are thinking about any kind of adjustment, I keep going back to pay raises just because that's what I heard when I came in, but that's something that you probably would want us to include, because if you were to give even a modest raise, it could very easily eat up that $200,000, and your other funds, they're going up could be flat. So that's something that if you're thinking about, I'd probably recommend us to include that in the report or some version so you can see what that looks like long term. And that might help you make your decision.
And when would you need that in order to have it ready for budget time for us in July? How much lead time do you need?
If you can tell us an idea of, I don't know if you're talking about a percentage increase or, a dollar amount, we can incorporate that in here within a week's time, and Paige can have that ready for you when she helps you with your budget.
Kenan, do you think that's a good idea? I do too. Okay.
Yeah, I would strongly recommend if you're thinking about that, because it's easy to say, yeah, we can afford it, just looking at 2024. But once you start looking at 25 and 26, you might come up with a different answer.
Jason, as far as the PSAP goes, we saw some different breakdowns, 0.1, 0.11, 0.12. Do you have any recommendations as far as what you think makes the best sense for the county?
0.1 is the most the county council can approve. If you go above 0.1, it would involve the income tax council, which would involve the county and the other tax units. And now the county and the city, they have enough votes that you could, if you both approved it, you could adopt it. Depending upon how much you need, I think some numbers that we ran, our Butch ran, I think 0.1 was sufficient to get you through a number of years. But I haven't really looked at that detailed analysis. But I always say, again, you hate to raise taxes, but if you're going to raise them, you might as well do it in one swoop and not come back, this year and then have to come back 2 years and do it all over again.
What's confusing when we do the budget is we have two individuals that are paid out of county general, where we have, looks like this year we appropriated $114,000 for enhanced 911 county out of general, whereas we budgeted totally separate E91. Hold on.
This year you budgeted $116,172. Last year you budgeted $103,100.
Okay. And then under the enhanced 911 non-general, the department request was $626,000, and we budgeted, you have that as around $700,000, was it not? It's about $700,000. So we did budget nearly over $850,000 out of Henry County for 911.
So Debbie, when I added up everything from general, I got 240.
Yeah, I told you wrong, it was
Okay.
124 this year, it was 116 last year. And for county general or for,
I was looking at county general. I might be reading it wrong.
in county general in 22, we spent $165,800.
Okay, that's right. And so far this year, the 75. So from the general fund, it's 165. Okay.
What about the 1222 fund on the enhanced 911? Because I have,
That's for county general, not what I just said is for county general.
okay,
We can't, I mean, that other fund, it can only be used for 911.
Correct.
And we don't
won't get
put,
any dollars out of
we
it.
don't put that money in there.
okay.
That's state money, right, and city contribution? Okay.
I guess that's one thing that I will bring up, because to your question about what rate should you adopt, I don't think you were talking about this specifically, but that is one thing, the PSAP revenue, it can only be used for PSAP. So, if point one, which I think brings in a little over $1 million in revenue, you want to make sure you have $1 million of expenses, because what you don't want to do is generate $1 million and you don't have $1 million of expenses to spend it on, then you just, build it up, because that's not something I'd recommend, the best use of the dollar. So as long as you can show that you have expenses to fund that or use that, then I think it's a good number.
So apart from public perception, is there a negative to raising it once and then raising it again in a few years if we see that's necessary?
It's really more your issue going through the process.
Right.
And
Well, I don't think there's any doubt we've got to raise it because we're heading into deficit if we don't. So I don't think that's an issue, although we can't vote tonight or make any decisions tonight. The need is somewhere between absolute and critical. So. But the other departments are probably going to say the same thing, but we have to prioritize. We've got to take action, that's for sure. If we're considering over 1.0 or 0.1, we have to involve the city. So,
I'm personally not seeing that we need more than 0.1 right now. I'm just going to throw that out there, but I know we're not deciding that tonight.
And I would also point out, as you're kind of talking about the LOA, just as a good schedule, if you look at page 44, this is your current local income taxes that you have. Again, this is page 44. Because one thing that this will impact, you can see the local income tax, it's kind of broken up into three different buckets. You have your property tax relief, which the max that you can allocate is 1.25%. You're currently at 0.25%. You have your expenditure rate that can consist of your certified shares, which goes to your general fund, your public safety, economic development, which you don't have implemented, and then your correctional rate. That right now you currently have 1.45%. Again, your max is 2.5. So if you increase your public safety, that counts toward your 2.5. But again, you're only at 1.45, so you have a lot of room there. There's some counties that they're close to that 2.5. So to your question, that might be something where we may want to be careful because we don't want to bump up too close to that 2.5 because then you don't have flexibility. Hopefully we're talking 5, 10, 20 years down the road to maybe increase, edit or certified shares that not only benefits the county, but benefits the city and the other units as well.
Right.
So you still have some room there.
I think I calculated this afternoon if we're to do something with a safety lit, the county gets 51% and the city would get 44% of that. And then the other towns get much, much smaller percentage if we were to do something with public safety. And that would require the tax council in Newcastle to do that. You said 1.45. Is that because you're taking the property tax relief off that 1.7 total?
Correct, because the property tax relief has its own little bucket. It has a cap of 1.25, and then the expenditure is kind of all those columns there in the middle. The 1% certified shares, the 0.25 public safety, economic development if you had any, and then the correctional and rehabilitation rate at 0.2. That adds to the 1.45.
Okay, so we have a 0.8 that we have cushion for to get to the 2.5. And you said we're kind of in the middle of the 92 counties as far as...
Yeah, you're around 52, 53. And I looked, if you were to increase it by 0.1, I think there'd be like 42 counties still ahead of you
Okay.
with higher rates than what you would have if you...
My argument that I've used in the past is our per capita income and our family, I'm trying to think of the stat, average
Medium household income.
family income is quite a bit lower than state average. So I think we have to weigh that as well. We may be in the middle, but our general population is below middle. So anyway, carry on, unless the council has more questions.
The next fund was community corrections fees. You can see there that that's pretty much staying constant. Nothing really to report there. The next few funds are kind of the MVH funds, motor vehicle highway and the motor vehicle highway restricted. We just kind of used your budget and then carried that forward. But these are, funds that typically, usually kind of spend the money that you have, or you kind of accumulate it and fund larger projects. So those budgets, you have a little bit more kind of flexibility and what you want to use it for, except for the operating costs. But you do have a significant amount of expenses in your MVH, but some of your capital expenses that you have a little more flexibility on what that can be used for and adjust as revenue changes. Again, page 30 is your MVH restricted, so that's just for new projects. Sorry. The next is your local road and street. Again, similar, you kind of spend funds out of that as you have available and as projects occur. Next is wheel tax. Similar situation there. Page 36, we did your self-insurance, which, as you know, that's a fund that's kind of hard to predict. So we just kind of took the averages of the revenue and expenses, but I know you guys have a good handle on that fund.
I have a question for the commissioners. What's the contract with employee insurance for next year? I don't know if I read that or not. Is it increased, and if so, by what percentage?
No, it does not, it's flat.
Hallelujah, council.
Yeah, it came in flat, when we approved it, April, March, April, it came in flat,
Great.
yeah, no increase.
Good news. Mark it down.
Page 40, I'm just kind of going through these very quickly, but if you want me to slow down, let me know. But page 40 is the Cume Bridge Fund. I'm sorry, 40 is the Cume Cap Development Fund. The Cume Bridge was before that, but that one's, again, a fund that usually build up and pay for projects as you have to build up the revenue.
I know, and I don't want to monopolize this, but I'm the liaison for the highway department, and they can't do a major bridge or even a medium-sized bridge. What's the money in that fund? So are there other funds that can be used? It seems like there is, that can be used for bridges other than a cumulative bridge. But I think we've prioritized our highways, which are not the best in the world. People driving on them will attest to that. I think we've prioritized probably chip seal and repaving. So that doesn't leave a whole lot for bridges. But he is, Joe, are you the highway or Steve liaison for the commissioners? Steve is, okay. At any rate, he's going after federal NDOT monies, not NDOT, US DOT
USDA.
monies for a major bridge, because our cumulative bridge doesn't touch the cost of that, so.
Page 40, I did want to bring this one up because your Cume Cap Development Fund, this is kind of outside your maximum levy, but is based upon your tax base. Based upon your current budget for 2023, which is a significant increase from 2022. So this assumes you spend your budget and that gets carried forward. We're showing that in 2024, you would have a negative balance at that time. So again, I saw that your budget was quite a bit higher in 2023. I didn't know if you moved some expenses over there, which you could because you do have a healthy balance historically, but that's something that you couldn't do year after year. So that might be something where in 2024 you might need to move some expenses back over to the general fund or public safety or wherever it most appropriate fits.
Debbie, did we move the cars there for the sheriffs?
We did.
What? We moved it to the left. Do you remember what we moved into CCD last year? What we moved into
Computer
CCD?
maintenance.
Okay.
Did it increase $400,000?
That's a big increase. 300 more, or we? Okay.
So if that's a one-time expense, then maybe we can adjust it back down for 24 going forward, but.
That's heading downward according to your chart.
Right. Yeah, if you keep a budget of 600, close to $700,000, really we can only afford that this year, and then next year we can't afford the same or similar size budget.
So we need to respond accordingly or react accordingly.
And then, for those that have seen this report before, we start on page 42 and 43. This is just the description of the different funds and what expenses can be used or paid out of each fund. So I think this is something that you've found helpful during budget time in the past when you're trying to move expenses around. This is a good resource. Page 44 is the income tax that we just went over. Page 45 and 46, this may be helpful for you as you're looking at your budget and working with your department heads. It kind of shows, what you actually spent compared to what you had budgeted. In most cases, it's been over 100% or more. But like I said, like the reassessment's one where historically, Jody's office hasn't spent, 100%, about 90%. So this is kind of a good, look at the last couple of years and what you spent compared to what you budgeted. And then after that, the last 4 or 5 schedules is just all the bonds that you have outstanding and the annual payments.
Which bond is the one that we just passed in the fall for the courthouse?
I think that's page 53, the very last page. About $5.8 million outstanding.
And Susan's question the other day at some meeting we were at was January 2027. Is the next time we have other opportunities to maybe consider a bond. Now, that's going off, the Justice Center is going off next year, isn't it?
Yeah. If you look at page 21, it's the last payment's December of this year. But that's also why if you look on page 53, you can see, the first payment this year, it's around $954,000 and increases to $1.7 million. We took that into consideration when we issued these bonds, that those were falling off. But also, if you look at page 53, if you look at the annual bond payments, you can see, this year it's $954,000, next year it's $1.7 million, next year's almost $1.9 million and $1.9 million. We structured that knowing that if you did need to issue a second bond before 2027, we could do that and try to have as little impact as possible to the taxpayers showing a rate increase. So depending upon the size of the bond issue and the project, we might be able to do another bond issue before 27 and have a minimal impact if that case arose where you needed funds for a certain project.
I've noticed interest rates have gone up considerably in the last 5 years.
Oh, yes. Yeah. We could not get that today by any means.
Had some really, really good interest rates, including the jail. Those days are past for a while, looks like. So, council, I know that Joel had another meeting with a city that he represents, or a town he represents, I believe, but one thing we're going to have to decide at our June 22nd meeting if we're going to go with 1.0, which does not require Newcastle's involvement, or if we're going over that, we have to decide that because we have to work with them. And I know there's representatives from Newcastle here, and I know they're interested in a PSAP. I don't think right. Right. So we really need, we can't make any decisions because this is a work session. And I can't contact more than 2 of you to not have a serial meeting. So I may be contacting Joel to see how to legally handle this. But I do know that if we go over 1%, we have to involve the tax council, which means we have to involve Newcastle in this decision. If we don't, if we stick at 1 or lower, we can do it unilaterally, and that's just by law, given what we were instructed by both you, Lisa Lee, and Joel Harvey. So I've got to figure out how to legally handle that decision and still give 10 days' notice.
And I think, I'll defer to Joel on this, but I think for the notice, you're right, there's an ordinance or resolution that has to be approved at a public hearing, also has to be put in the paper 10 days before. But I think you can put, like, say if you want to do 0.1, you could adopt something lower than that. So if you still hadn't made a decision, but you knew you wanted to have the meeting, you could advertise a higher amount and adopt or approve something lower, if that gives you more flexibility, more time.
I'm sorry, we'll have to confer with Joel to see if that's how to do that and be kosher and legal about it, because we do want to do it according to Hoyle.
And I can give Joel, I have templates of what's on the DLGF website, so I'm sure you have access to it, and he can too, but if he needs direction, he can contact me and I can show him where they're at.
Yeah. Without saying more than I am legally supposed to, I don't think the problem of the PSAP is going to be the issue. It's going to be the amount. That's about all I can say. I know a lot of people came here to support that, but they've been at several meetings to support it. We've heard it, and we see the data, and you just supported that data. We've just not been communicative about it because we really can't, except for a public meeting, which this is not.
I think this meeting was very beneficial. This is what we needed to see to be able to have some further discussion about it, because we were very uncertain to what state government results were going to look like and how it was going to impact us moving forward. So I appreciate the information.
I agree with Shannon, and I think this is just a matter of due diligence. If we have to levy this tax, like, I want to know we've exhausted every option and we've gone through every bit of data that we fully understand.
You know, one of the things that Butch provided for us was the impact to the average taxpayer. You know, those at 50,000 and 75, and even at 1%, it obviously would be half the impact of our 0.2 jail tax, which back then was less than $100 a year for the median household income. So this would be half that, so it'd be like $50 a year. Or a nice meal out at Applebee's for a family. Well, it used to be a family of 5. Now it'd be about a family of 4 if you go to the 2 for $25 special. So it's not a whole lot. Go ahead, Butch. I know you've provided us a lot of information over the last 6 months, and I think you've spoken to every council member, so I think we've heard you.
And I'll be very short. I just wanted to, I guess, make a point, or try to make a point. I don't know if you heard me when you were talking about the 0.10, $47 a year for $50,000. So, you know, you're not going to get as much of a meal for that. But anyway, the difference between 0.10 and 0.12 is $8. $8 additional a year gets you up to 0.12, which means it's $56 instead of $47 that it's going to cost the worker of Henry County a year. And I guess from my standpoint, the 0.10, that gets us 12 years. 12 years is better than nothing. I agree to that. But, you know, a couple of the council here and back there, when me and the other people was going through it with them, their question was, you know, 12 years, what would it take to get to 20? And that's where the 1-2 come up. I went back to Jason and asked him, what would it take, crunch the numbers and tell me what it take to get to 20 years? Because you guys was the ones wanting the 20 years. And I think 20 years is a good, because you don't have to mess with it again. 20 years is 20 years. And, you know, and it's only $8 more a year to get to 20 years and run the dispatch center, bring it up to standard, and have something that works for the next 20 years. So that was all I really wanted to point out. Was the
I've got a
fact that-
question, and I don't know if it's for you, Butch, or for Mr. Semler. That 20 years, that $8, I understand, gives us that total fund to support 911 for 20 years. Do you know what adder was used year by year? Was it 3% adder for inflation and wage increases, or what was used to determine the expenses over those 20 years?
The 12 or 20 years, 3%.
Thank
That's
you.
what's on that. You all got a copy of that sheet.
Yeah.
And there's a column there that says 3%.
I've got it, yeah.
And that's what was calculated in there based off the figures at the end of last year onto this year, and it's 3%. So
Thank you.
that's-
I saw you had the paper in front of you, and I didn't want to go digging for
Yeah,
it.
that's fine.
Thank you.
That's all
I
right.
have a couple comments too. I wanted to tell our city representatives that came here that, at least from my perspective, I would expect you to stop contributing additional funding to 911, just as we would back that money out of our general fund as well, and we would fund 911 entirely from this tax. So that's just my personal perspective, and I don't want you guys to feel like we're being antagonistic towards you guys, so really appreciate you. My question is just personally how much, and I know when we go through these graphs, we're looking at keeping our accounts solvent, and we looked forward to 2026. So in all of our other funds, we're making sure that our accounts are solvent and we're trending in the right direction for 3 or 4 years. So when I look at the PSAP tax, I'm not necessarily looking for 20 years personally. If we're solvent for 10 years, I think that's good, and that's my personal perspective for the amount. So I just wanted to make those 2 comments.
I would echo what she said in relation to Newcastle. We appreciate you on the airport, on 911, helping out until we got our fiscal house in order, which I think we're finally getting there. Not
Butch?
because of the state, but I think we've got our fiscal house in order. But we are a fiscally conservative body here.
Butch, did that increase at 3%, how does that work with, the community growing? What type of fund, would the 3% cover the additional employees you would need to staff 911 with the growth in the community over the next 12 or 20 years? Can you address that, how that plays into it?
Any one of those percentages, 0.10, 0.12, whatever, 0.11, on this sheet here that you've all got a copy of, is with it calculates the increase of the additional employees to run like we're supposed to be running, and the shortfall that we have, but it also, that 3% covers any kind of cost we'd have, whether it be raises, and whether it be, and there was always a little bit of increase in maintenance, software maintenance, hardware maintenance, generators, all those type of things that come in every year. Every year they go up a little bit, $500, $600, but that's the 3% that covers all across the board to get the number of years, whether it be 12 years or 20 years down the road. And one of the other sheets that I give all of you and talk to most of you about, not trying to get into the middle of a fight nowhere around the line or anything, but the city traditionally always has contributed just a little bit more than what the county has. The county gets theirs out of the general fund, and then the city pays us a lump sum of money. Then they still do the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, but the sheriff's department pays the 1/3 for the county out of the sheriff's department fund, not out of the general fund. Where they get their 1/3 at, I don't know. I know where I got it when I was there, but so those kind of things. There's another split that's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, which is the $12,000 liability insurance for the dispatchers, and that gets split 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Commissioners pay 1/3 of it, and then I pay 1/3 of 911 money, and the city pays 1/3. So there is additional funds besides this initial money they put in. And on that one sheet that I gave you, which is the state report that I have to send in of every penny that I spend and what category it comes out, the city's always just a few $1,000s more than what the county is. Is it worth arguing over? I don't necessarily think it's worth arguing over, but at least it should be noted that traditionally, ever since 1989, they've always paid more than the county has. And, you know, I don't like it when people say, well, you're not paying your share. Well, I think they are paying their share. And I think the county's paying what they can pay, and it should have been done a little bit differently when they started this project, but that didn't happen that way. So hopefully, and I guess the other thing is I don't have to ask Susan this, would it be your concept that if we put on a PSAP tax like this, and it's built in like this, that you would want to continue to pay the $170,000 or whatever every year into 911?
No, that's the opposite of what I said. I might not have made it
Okay.
clear. I fully expect that we would back out the general
Right.
fund money, and it would all be funded from the
It'll all be
PSAP,
funded out between the PSAP
just like
tax,
this city would. That's,
PSAP tax
Right.
was funded, and the 911 phone monies that's coming in. That's what's calculated here to
Right.
pay for it. The $30-some thousand, $34,000 that Knightstown pays into it for the one dispatcher, that they get to keep their money also.
that's what I would do,
Yeah.
personally. One vote.
That's how we figured this, so that 911 would be self-sufficient. And I guess, again, back to the 11 years is great, but 11 years isn't very long. And for $8 more, you could do it for 20 years. Chances are none of you'd be even sitting there when it come around where you have to raise it.
But think of that our tax base could increase in 11 years. And then we might, for 11 years, be taking in more tax dollars than we need. If Newcastle continues to grow,
Or we just.
that's
roll-
what I want to avoid. What'd you say?
said, or we could just roll the tax back at that time.
That never happens.
That's a rarity, roll back taxes.
And, 10 years from now, 8 years from now, you can say, hey, we're on a 20-year plan, but we've got surplus money, so we're going to roll it back. That
But
makes
we won't be here, and what if that doesn't happen?
Butch isn't going to be here very much longer. I said Butch isn't going to be here very much longer. You've given us a lot of information, so thank you. You've given us a lot of data to mull over. Yeah, well, we're going to give you stability. I feel confident about that. It's just a matter of how much.
Just to draw a line in the sand and get all frustrations out, the city has always had an interlocal agreement, and we've put in our budget $350,000 a year towards this, and the Lowett piece of pie is divided somehow, but it's not been a fair piece of pie. The 911 people needed new headsets. The city paid for it. The Shenandoah School could not receive any radios or telephone signal inside the school, or Knightstown, or Sheriff's Department had trouble getting radio signaling for it. The city said, get the towers. If there's an additional fund, we'll reappropriate some money. It doesn't matter what it is. The airport, the city put in cash. The county's opinion was, well, we'll truck some dirt and we'll do it in kind. So to find out that word has never got back to you, it's never been a fair piece of pie. And Newcastle is no different than Moreland, than Spiceland, or any other community, and they pay nothing into this. But our units run there just like they would run 2 blocks down the road here. So it truly is frustrating that the questions tonight have even been asked that have came up, but state statute states that it's the county's responsibility to provide 911 service for the county. The city has just always been there because we're very proud of our special services. The city and the county's special services do a great job. I'd put them up against any other county in the state or anywhere.
As would we.
But we need to have the financing there, and I appreciate you saying what you're saying, but
It's our job to do. due
When you
diligence. It's our job to ask questions and get information and react to that. It seems to me that the PSAP would be a equitable solution for everybody and fair, which is what I intend to support. But I'm going to ask questions because I want to understand.
That's fine to ask questions, but when you look at 20, 21, 22, 23, you can just forget about that 350 because, you know, the city's not going to have an interlocal agreement for that 350 anymore. I mean, we've tried to be nice, and it's got us a back seat on the bus, and we need that $350,000. We're trying to do the right thing.
I think we're on the same page.
But we have obligations that we need to meet too, so.
And I think it's been greatly appreciated while we're trying to get our financial house in order, which we finally are, according to Baker Tilly, from where we were 5 years ago, that now we can maybe pay our fair share, where in the past we were running a lot of red ink. So thank you for those years where we didn't have excess monies for picking up the slack. It's greatly appreciated. Now I think it's our turn to pick up the slack, and I think this PSAP is one way we can reciprocate.
Absolutely.
And
We
we are,
appreciate that.
we are aware of your contribution to 911, and we appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Rex?
I'll just take a minute. Not here to talk about fair share. I think fair share sometimes is a mirage because I think you just need to get things done. But I am here to say I agree vehemently with Mrs. Hune. I think if you can get us out 10 or 13 years, we have no clue what life will be like here in 10 years. The 911 center may be ran by AI in 10 years.
It may be,
I mean,
literally.
seriously, so the way things are going, you have a lot of things that will happen. You may get different funding from the state. So I think if you can get 10 or 13 years, you're doing pretty good.
To go along with that, I look at the report that Jason and Paige gave us in 2019. It's modified considerably. The trends, the assumptions, what the state has done, and who knows what the next 10 years is going to be. But it's almost guaranteed it won't be the same. There will be changes and alterations to that. But if that buys us 10 to 13 years, the next group of council people, which I'm sure is going to be wiser than me or us, and you're right, AI may take over. AI may be, we just can't forecast the future. Second coming may come way before that. I don't know.
Well, in 5 or 6 years, Jason will be able to come up here and give you a projection about where you're going to be at in the next 5, and you'll be able to
Well, that's
plan
true.
for
He'll
that
probably
because you
have an
guys
AI
are doing a
program
better
that he
job.
can just
I mean,
hand it to us.
you guys are doing a better job of trying to keep up with things. So I know if 5 years from now he comes in,
Well,
that
I think we want to work well together. I mean, you're the county seat, and you're 35% of the population of the county, and it benefits everybody if we can
I
work
would
well
like
together.
padding on these. Talk about the seat. I'd like padding on these benches out here. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Talk to the commissioners. Maybe when we do our courthouse updates, we can get some padded seating. Just updating the seating to be less painful. That's all.
The mayor has been here before for these long meetings. You can tell he's prepared. Council, any questions while Jason's still here? And
What will we expect from communication about timing for the PSAP?
I'm going to get with Joel to make sure we do everything legally as far as how do I poll legally? What kind of meeting do I have to have, or can I do an informal poll on the 1% versus other? Because Newcastle needs to know if they need to be involved. And we need to know if they're going to be involved, and we have the 10-day notification, and the next time the Middletown News publishes is the 15th, so we need to get our ducks in a row.
I don't mean to even think that I'm Joel Harvey or anywhere close to it, but just because of all the different meetings we have had to have, you will probably have to have a special public meeting. It will probably have to be done, whether it's point 1, point 1, 2, in a public meeting.
I wouldn't be surprised.
48 hours notice of that meeting, more than likely.
So I'll get with Joel tomorrow, and then I'll let you know what his advice is. But I think Bobby is probably correct. They've gone down this road before. and I suspect that's going to be what he advises. Anything else, council? I will get back with you after contacting Joel. We have our regular meeting on the 22nd. We may have to have a special meeting prior to that. On the 29th, we may have our special meeting, public hearing, and you won't be here. So noted. Anything else?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Thank you, public, for coming, Newcastle folks, Angela, everybody else.